Well, I wasn't planning on looking at Tears of the Kingdom when it came out until I put up that poll asking you guys if you would be interested in it, and the majority said they would want me to take a trip to Hyrule before Hell, so I had to oblige. I just keep getting pulled away from that meat hook, man. But in actuality, of course I wanted to see what the sequel of Breath of the Wild had in store for us. That game inarguably changed the gaming landscape forever with its multitude of systems and mechanics that nobody had ever done before, and the sequel was looking to do the same thing, but just again. I haven't said it in a while because it hasn't come up, but I'll renew my controversial opinion for the people in the back. I'm really not a huge fan of the Zelda series. To be fair though, I've also not spent a lot of time with it. I played through Ocarina of Time for the first time in 2020 and did not have a great time. That game is just not for me, plain and simple. The structure, the combat, I wasn't really enjoying it at any point. Again, I know that's a very unpopular opinion and I can accept that, but I'm also willing to bet that I was far less lenient of the Zelda game from 1998 because I had played and loved the one from 2017. My big brother was home from college around the time and brought his copy of Breath of the Wild with him. I stole it and dumped about 30 or so hours into it to beat it before he had to go back. Even with the impending date of him leaving and taking the game, which maybe forced me to be a little less explorative than I would have liked, I had a great time with it and saw what the hype was all about. But strangely, I wasn't convinced to go out and get the game for myself after I finished it. I just had my experience that one time and literally haven't touched it since. I had fun, but it didn't change my life. So maybe you can see why I wasn't frothing at the mouth to jump into its sequel, but I was stupid. Let's just get this out of the way now. Tears of the Kingdom is a masterpiece. I know I was the guy who famously proclaimed that there is virtually no such thing as a 10 out of 10 game when I looked at Elden Ring, but this game shatters my own beliefs. The simple inclusion of the new abilities is enough for me to beg you to go out and play this game for yourself. The feeling of exploration is unlike anything I've ever played. Even Breath of the Wild, as crazy as that sounds. But before I go any further into the details that make this a once-in-a-generation game, you have to stop watching if you don't want to be spoiled. It's unlikely you know absolutely nothing about Tears of the Kingdom, but I don't want to give away any more than I can help. I think that's the best way to go into this game, as blind as you can possibly get. Doom Guy will just have to wait for right now because the next breakthrough in gaming is here, and it's $70, but honestly, it's a pretty justifiable price whenever you realize that this is a once-in-a-generation gaming experience, but I'll stop gassing the game up. This is The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. I wasn't too interested in Breath of the Wild's narrative when I played it back in 2018. It could be because I didn't have access to the game forever and just wanted to see as much as possible, but nothing I saw really grabbed my attention. I remember things about it, but that mostly pertains to the characters. I remember how some of them acted, but I don't really remember anything actually happening aside from Link helping every corner of Hyrule solve their little dilemmas. And that's still pretty much how it goes in Tears of the Kingdom, but I'm getting ahead of myself already. Sometime after the events of Breath of the Wild, Zelda and Link are seen spelunking in some newly discovered ruins below Hyrule Castle. This cavern leads them to a mummy floating ominously in the center of this opening. The two then get the bright idea to just waltz over there and start f***ing with it. And oh wow, what do you know, it turns out to be everyone's favorite melee C-tier, Ganondorf. The whole place starts shaking, Zelda gets Kingdom Hearts down a big hole, and Link loses an arm. Link, somehow alive, wakes up on some floating islands having been saved by Rauru, the first king of Hyrule. He explores these floating islands in order to power up the arm Rauru kindly donated to Link to save his life. That was sweet, but ew. Zelda, however, has vanished without a trace. Eventually getting back down to the surface, Link regroups with the inhabitants of Hyrule to see that the land has been cast in this substance called gloom after chunks of the land have been rising from the ground. This event was then coined as the Upheaval. From here, Link has to essentially chase rumors all across Hyrule regarding Zelda's whereabouts and how to stop the gloom from spreading. This will eventually lead him to, once again, help the four corners of Hyrule and the civilizations that live there, with all of them being troubled by some sort of natural phenomenon that's making their life an utter hell. The characters you team up with in each region also see visions of Princess Zelda from time to time, which initially confuzzled me, because after doing some side activities with Impa, you learn that Zelda somehow ended up in the past, during the time of King Rauru and his wife Sonia. So I didn't believe this for a second. At first I thought we had a Sephiroth situation on our hands, where it was maybe some kind of projection of Princess Zelda, and then the doppelganger starts instigating terrible stuff, so my Sephiroth theory started to get some more credibility. Link eventually helps the 4 regions like previously, with the sages from each faction finding their respective secret stones. These little gems that King Rauru gave to their ancestors to amplify their abilities for the eventual battle with Ganondorf. But with their new powers, all 4 pledge their swords to the eventual fight against the Demon King in the present day. And once the player is ready, they're free to head for the depths beneath Hyrule Castle. A hard battle is fought, but the sages help Link weaken Ganondorf, backing the man into a corner. So I didn't get all the glyphs that show what Zelda gets up to in the past. I think I had 5 left by the time my credits rolled, but I did see enough to know that when someone swallows their secret stone, they're said to transcend their body and mind and become immortal. Ganondorf knew this too apparently, and vows to destroy Link even at the cost of his own being. The Demon King swallows his stone, transforming into the Demon Dragon, nearly taking Link out. But luckily, another dragon suddenly appears, saving Link and supplying him with a refreshed Master Sword. The mysterious dragon and Link team up to vanquish Ganondorf once and for all, saving the land. It's then revealed that this dragon is Princess Zelda, insinuating that she ate her secret stone, I think. But thanks to some don't ask, don't tell magic mumbo jumbo, King Rauru and Queen Sonia take them to the in-between dimension and help return her to normal. Link and Zelda then safely return to Hyrule to wait for the next time the world is threatened. I'm obviously not much of a Zelda fan, but anyone who's spent any time watching videos online knows about the key players in the Zelda franchise. And as someone with this secondhand knowledge of the series, I was left more satisfied than I was with Breath of the Wild's narrative. Of course, I only know most of this game's story. Again, I didn't find all the glyphs, but from what I saw, there was a decent amount of mystery behind what happened with Zelda. Where did she go? Who were these people? These things were cool to learn as I unlocked more cutscenes. King Rauru might not have much of an entertaining personality, but this dude gets the job done when he needs to. Well, until he dies. Whoops. And his wife, Queen Sonia, what a sweetheart. This is where most of the intrigue is. I should clarify, the mystery of where Zelda is, because the other aspects, it's no use. The Rito sage Tulin is a younger warrior who wants to prove himself. Okay. The Gerudo sage Riju wants to protect her people. Alright. The Goron sage Yunobo wants to protect his people. Yeah, and the Zora sage Sidon wants to protect his people. You see what I mean? There is a little more going on in each scenario than that, but it's nothing that really deserves any more attention. Riju is best girl, she's easily my favorite personality-wise, and she's got some badass moments. But these sages' scenarios are way more entertaining than they are as individuals. Yunobo got brainwashed and is now brainwashing the entire Goron city. That's wild! I wonder how he'll react when we put everything back in order. Oh, he doesn't really mention it. Okay. Sidon is being overprotective of his fiancée because he's projecting the insecurities of not being able to save his baby sister onto her. That's a pretty interesting dynamic. Oh, they just breezed past any significance it could have had. All of the sages have agonizingly similar ends to their quest lines. When they acquire their respective secret stones and are talking with their ancestors, they all say pretty much the same exact thing. These would have been great opportunities to connect back with the Zelda plotline and show us something about what the build-up to their fight with Ganondorf was like. But instead we get 4 nearly identical scenes that say the same thing but slightly different. Not gonna lie. For the last 2, I was on my phone. I was so checked out after the first 2. The previous sages all tell the new sages they're the pride of their respective factions, and I'm pretty sure I heard "I expect nothing less from my descendant" every single time too. It's not even subtle with this reused writing, and I get it. You have to make sure they're in the same ballpark because of how free players are to tackle them in any order they want. But the order doesn't matter when the stories are so self-contained. Giving them a little personality would do nothing but deepen the player's connection with the new generation of sages. I wish Link and Zelda had more time to interact throughout the game. The way Link takes Zelda's torch because she was fishing for something in her pocket was so adorable, it made me want more of them together. I like seeing Ganondorf in action. Calamity Ganon in the last game was one of those amorphous, faceless threats. It was dangerous, but it was more fun to see a face behind these heinous acts of terror. Bringing Ganondorf out is a good fix to this problem, and I dig the design too. Everyone looks good around the board. Rauru looks like the Super Saiyan 5 Beerus fan art come to life, but I respect it. Purah, you already know what I think, and Nintendo are fully aware of what they've done here today. Just don't be surprised when you check my Twitter likes and you see a lot of Purah fan art. The story mostly hits a lot of the big picture stuff it was trying to set up, but it fails to capture a lot of the small details that would have made these characters have lasting impressions. But I wasn't interested in the story to begin with. I was mostly curious to see what they were going to cook up for the gameplay for this new Zelda formula. Breath of the Wild changed the way open world games are made. That's not even up for debate. We saw its influence in titles start to pick up around 2020 when Genshin Impact released. The climbing and gliding systems are nearly identical to Nintendo's 2017 trendsetter. And then last year alone, I counted 2 that were banking off of its design principles with Elden Ring and Sonic Frontiers. Its impact was immense, not only because of how it was structured, but because of all the abilities it gave the player. Funnily enough though, from today's viewpoint, the abilities in Breath of the Wild almost look quaint. Like, you made an ice block. That was one of the powers. Again, not hating on the likes of Stasis, Cryonis, Magnesis, and the bombs, but the toys we were given this time around, I don't know how I would ever play another Zelda game without them. Let's start small and work our way up, shall we? The weapon system in Tears of the Kingdom is pretty unchanged coming from its predecessor. There are 3 archetypes that weapons can be broken up into. Swords. This covers your basic sticks, clubs, and short swords. The attack button will perform a 3-hit combo, and holding the input will charge Link's signature spin move. Next are great swords, or heavy weapons in general. Claymores, great clubs, big hammers, that kind of stuff. These have a slow 2-hit combo that's honestly not ideal, but this class makes up for that by having the best heavy attack in the game. As long as Link's stamina isn't out, he'll swing these things in a circle doing continuous damage. Finally, there are spears. These are the safest to use by a landslide. The 4-hit combo comes out extremely quick and can hit enemies from a safe distance. And the charge attack is a multi-hit poking move. It's alright, but nothing game-changing. All weapons can also be thrown, but it's not super effective seeing as how this is really damaging to the weapons and the damage dealt isn't worth it. Shields are back and are great for absorbing all kinds of physical damage. If timed just right, most attacks can be parried. Didn't use this a whole lot. The parry has a lot less utility here due to the lack of any lasers to bounce back, and the flat out better technique for combat this time around is the flurry rush. Still, the most busted move in Link's arsenal is the ability to time a side jump or a backflip just before the enemy's attack hits. This will trigger bullet time and allow Link to unload a handful of free hits on the enemy. I find it easy to play defense with a one-handed weapon so I can have a shield to take any hits I miss time, but if I do make the flurry rush, I can easily swap to my most damaging weapon during this lengthy slowdown sequence. Flurry rush is strange though, man. It still feels like it activates whenever it wants to sometimes. Where was I? Oh yeah, the shields. Yeah, didn't use them as actual shields a whole lot. There were moments when they protected me, but I used them mostly for sleds and skateboards. Oh, we'll get there soon. Next are the bows and arrows. Not much to say on the basics, it's just the bow and arrow. The gyro aiming is so perfect for lining up headshots though. I never thought I'd rely so heavily on motion controls, yet here we are. Melee combat still isn't fantastic. Nothing has really changed from the previous game. Fights against basic enemies mostly come down to making the enemy ragdoll and then slashing them until they die, or if you slap them away and have to chase their limp bodies around until their health is gone. It's perfectly serviceable, but I would have liked to see some more improvements to the fundamentals. Those are just Link's basics, however. Things get more interesting when we see what his new arm brings to the table. The most straightforward ability we have is Ascend. It is exactly what the name implies. If there is something above you, Link will point directly up and then travel straight through it. This alone is ridiculously impressive. Not as much for the moments where you go through a steel grate or a platform of wood. I'm more so talking about this ability being used underground and just popping out of somewhere on the surface. The cutscene that appears when traveling long distances is obviously a cleverly hidden loading screen, but I was still constantly wowed by this ability. Next we have Rewind, also pretty self-explanatory. Any loose object that has moved can be sent back through its previous trajectory. An enemy has an attack where they hurl a big thing at you? No problem, simply use Rewind to send it back to them. Rewind is great for a lot of things. It's actually given some good life in the open world thanks to these falling rocks that can be ridden back up to the floating sky islands. But most of its use comes into play while solving puzzles in temples and shrines. Next we have Fuse. Was weapon durability your sworn enemy in the previous game? Well, I hate to hear that because it's back in this game, but Fuse makes it almost a non-issue. Fuse allows you to combine just about any object in the game world, any object, with your weapons, shields, and even arrows. For things like your weapons, this is how you increase their base damage. Most weapons aren't the most damaging things on their own, so combining them with other things is primarily how you'll deal bigger damage numbers. Things like the horns and talons of enemies are a good way to simply make them hit harder, but using items charged with elemental properties will give these weapons the buff of that element. Shields with bigger base numbers are a bit easier to come across, so fusing objects with them are for more quirky uses. If you come across stone slabs, you can use them to completely block streams of fire, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, I made sure to always have a shield fused with an explosive barrel or a bomb in my inventory. It was always a good means to deal some solid damage if the enemy strikes the shield, but it was best for shield surfing in a crowd of enemies and then using that bullet time to pull off some sick headshots. And every individual arrow can have one item item fused to them before firing. These can be the parts from enemies to increase flat damage, they can be elemental items that turn them into ice or fire arrows, explosives like bomb flowers can make explosions wherever you shoot, and some items have unique uses altogether like any of the eyeballs. They allow arrows to home in on enemies and are so incredibly useful for attacking flying threats. This is legit one of the smartest changes this game has made. Scrapping all the different arrow types from the previous game to make basic arrows more abundant as a drop was genius. Then you can let Fuse do the rest of the heavy lifting, giving arrows even more options than before. It's f***ing brilliant. Finally, we have Ultra Hand, the game's defining mechanic. Think magnesis from Breath of the Wild, but now objects don't have to be made of metal. You can lift, lower, move, and rotate any object that's not part of the environment. And to take it a step further, you can stick anything and everything together to create whatever your imagination can conjure, legitimately. This leads into creative puzzles that have to be solved using Ultra Hand. You know, I have a tendency to overcomplicate things in my own life, but thanks to these new abilities, I can overcomplicate what are probably supposed to be simple Zelda puzzles too. I'm almost positive this isn't how this puzzle was supposed to be solved, yet here we are. But the objects that really show off the incredible potential of all of these mechanics are the Zonai devices and how they can be used together. A lot of the game's central mechanics revolve around making makeshift machines and contraptions to accomplish various tasks. Most commonly, you'll be making vehicles, whether they be best in the air, on land, or maybe even in water. Using Zonai devices to make these visions come to life is a big part of the experience. There are lots of different Zonai devices to become familiar with to get the most out of constructing vehicles. Gliders are a fantastic start for airbound creations. Alone, they can be good at gliding through the air. It'll be a little weird to maneuver, seeing as Link will have to shift around on the thing to turn or change altitude, but later on you'll find devices like fans. These are a great form of propulsion for gliders. One will get you moving, only fairly slowly, but several will see you soaring. There are also wheels. The large wheels in particular are favorites of mine. Finding a solid stone base and then attaching 4 wheels to it is a good start, and it'll go forward in one direction, but if you can find a control mechanism nearby, you can steer the buggy instead. Control mechanisms can influence a number of Zonai devices as well. It's not limited to just wheels, heavens no. And then you can also go as far as to deck out your creations with offensive Zonai devices like beam emitters or flamethrowers. They can be a little imprecise though, as they'll just shoot straight ahead, so why not place something like a cannon on top of a tracking module and watch as your vehicle now targets any enemy and destroys them. I wish I had been a little more creative with my time in Hyrule Fields. The craziest I ever got was making an enclosed vehicle in the depths. It wasn't really crazy, I know, but it was just so much fun to run around with it. I didn't feel comfortable going nuts with the creations because I didn't know which Zonai devices were hard to come by. You can find these Gachapon capsule machines in several key locations around the map, and by dropping Zonai charges into them, they'll dispense a decent amount of randomized Zonai devices out for you. These Zonai devices stay in Link's inventory and can be pulled out at any moment or occasion save for shrines. Each of the dispensers hold a different mix of Zonai devices, so it's a good idea to use every one you come across to add them to the map. It's so liberating knowing that you can carry around so many components and take them out whenever you might need them. And even after seeing how the game generously showers you with Zonai devices, I still kept my use of them in check because I have a bad habit of not using precious resources. That's 100% on me, but as I continue playing on my own time, you better believe I won't be so stingy. I legitimately cannot wait to jump back in and make some more monster creations. Seeing all the things the community has made gives me so many ideas. Some of these are a little frightening, not gonna lie, but most of them are genuinely amazing. I don't think I'll ever make a hovering device with a detachable drone that will auto-target enemies, but I can settle by trying to make some sort of death machine. Zonai devices can also be fused to your equipment like anything else in the game, and you know I always had either a sled or a minecart shield so that I could get around more quickly in the open world. I know I'm not the only person who loves shield surfing this much, right? I can't be. But attaching something like a Zonai rocket to a shield is also fantastic because it can give Link a huge vertical boost. And again, using these tools to solve puzzles in a totally unintentional way will stay as one of the game's biggest strengths. But of course, the best thing open world Zelda brings to the table is the exploration of its vast world. Skyview Towers are this game's Sheikah Towers. Quite a few are initially out of order, so you'll have to help out a repairman with a small task before you you can use it, but after that they'll skyrocket you into the air. Due to this game's focus on the sky, a new skydive mechanic has been added, allowing Link to freefall and even dive through the air after jumping off of a high height. Using these techniques in combination with the paraglider makes Skyview Towers the perfect launching point for expeditions. Literally, picking a direction and launching across the sky is thrilling every time and great for covering distance. Climbing is still as liberating as ever, and when paired with the movement-focused Zonai devices or strategic uses of the Ascend ability, traversal is simply a joy. The ruins above the sky are so interesting to explore. Most are set up in these sectioned off clusters of floating islands. Though you won't find any red echidnas up here guarding a big green rock, each of these clusters hosts a few points of interest. Some have you complete tests to unlock a shrine, some have traversal challenges that require you to get creative with provided Zonai tech. There are a few arenas you can find floating around housing battles against these Zonai constructs. These cube monsters are no joke if they end up getting to you, but it was so satisfying discovering that using Ultra Hand on the main cube disables the entire beast. Such a cool enemy type to fight. But my favorite finds are the chests with old maps inside. These old maps will mark a location below Hyrule in the depths. This shit, man, the depths are unsettling as hell, but it's so cool too. It's pitch black down here, so you'll have to use these light bloom flowers to illuminate your way. You can throw these things a short distance or fuse the seeds to an arrow that will send them much farther, but they're found in such high quantities you're better off just throwing them in front of you. You'll be drawn to these huge orange plant things that act as fast travel points in the depths and will illuminate a large vicinity. But even with all the light in the world, it's next to impossible to find special treasure chests in the depths because of how open it is. You'll need those X's to guide you to them, and you'll almost always be rewarded with an article of classic Zelda clothing, which are easily the best incentives in the game. In between these points of interest and treasure is gloom. These pools of icky paint-like goop will deplete Link's hearts, but also lock them off from being recovered by normal means. Even more threatening are the enemies that you can find covered in gloom. They hit harder than standard enemies, as well as applying the same status effect. Fights against gloom enemies are easily some of the most intense counters you'll have, because if you're not careful, your entire expedition can be jeopardized. But in spite of the terror gloom strikes into my heart, the expansiveness of the depths led to some of the best moments of my playthrough. Finding treasures and secrets down there never got old, and I'm still racking my brain trying to figure out how to get to this spot right here on my map. Seriously, how do I get over there? But even without the sky ruins or the depths, Hyrule itself is still easily one of, if not the best open world I've ever been let loose in. There are so many side activities to get lost in. I'd be here all day if I even listed all the ones I came across in my 50-ish hours of playtime. So instead, I'll just highlight a few of my favorites. I don't know how you hate this guy who's just trying to advertise his boss's company. He's a good worker, but he sucks at keeping these signs up. That's why I always stop to Ultra Hand him a temporary structure. Not only because it was fun to solve a few of these, I particularly got a chuckle out of the one in the west of the map. You can clearly see two snowballs behind him, but they don't stay up because they are balls. But conveniently, there's a big rock right behind them, which turns out to be perfect for this guy. That's a gratifying solve. And it doesn't hurt that he also rewards you with some decent health replenishing dishes. I will remember this Skyview Tower in particular forever. So its entrance is covered in these thorns that block me from entering. So after recognizing that they could be burned away after lighting them on fire, I realized what I have to do. It's constantly raining in this biome, so I can't just walk the fire up there. I had to build a covered walkway that I could use to safely move fire to the entrance, while also making sure the entrance itself had cover. That one felt good. There are several mini bosses that you can come across throughout the world, and I made it my mission to take some of these things down. A lot of them weren't too much trouble. Headshots with fused arrows are surprisingly strong against literally everything. But one enemy that I spent a good chunk of time fighting early on was the Thunder Gleeok. This giant three-headed dragon was an absolute nightmare with lightning attacks that could easily take me out if I wasn't careful. And after several failed attempts, I got him down to his last bit of health and had one of the most satisfying endings to a boss fight I've ever had in these games. Oh, hell yeah. It's technically a main quest, so you don't have to do it, but I'm glad I went down to the depths and took out the Yiga's clan boss. Very entertaining fight, and I was even happier to get the auto build functionality for my arm. This is a fully fledged part of the arm's abilities, but it's not required. It's just a really good quality of life feature. It records about 30 of the most recent creations you've put together with Ultra Hand and allows you to instantly reassemble that same machine from parts laying close by. Or you could use Zonite, which is a mineable resource to conjure these creations out of thin air. This is an amazing tool to have when you just want a vehicle or an aircraft quickly, because you can also find recipes to add to this thing's log of pre-built contraptions. Shrines are decent distractions as well. They're honestly not my favorite things. They do a good job of teaching me new things that I can do with Zonite devices or with the mechanics, so that's a plus. And I appreciate them being the real way to warp around Hyrule, but what I usually ended up doing was unlocking a lot of them as I went towards main objectives, and then after I got to a stopping point, I would go sit down on the couch and plow through all the ones I've unlocked. I could usually get about 3 or 4 upgrades to health or stamina from doing that. It's also why some of the footage you might see looks a little blurry. I used the Switch's built-in footage capture to get some small clips I figured I might need. Like I said, the hunt for armor and clothing was the best incentive for me throughout the game. Aside from the maps you can find in the sky, some NPCs give you marks on your map too, and they're always worth seeking out because they often give you great rewards that can come in handy throughout the journey. Lastly, let's talk about the new temples. These are kind of a big deal because traditional Zelda dungeons were something that the community felt was missing from Breath of the Wild. Everyone said shrines were too small and the Divine Beasts were too different to be accepted as true Zelda dungeons. Personally, I didn't mind the Divine Beast. I didn't like how visually similar they all were, but mechanically I thought they were passable. Not great, but passable. All of this is to say that I think the temples in this game blow the Divine Beast out of the water. Each of them brings their own unique mechanics to the table, as well as giving Link the power of that respective sage in that dungeon. For the Wind Temple, it was these bouncy air bows. I liked how much airtime these things gave me. The dungeon itself felt the most like a Divine Beast, with trying to navigate this giant boat, finding passages that led to these batteries that will unlock the door to the boss. Every temple still follows the same template of having to find 4 switches to throw to reach the boss. It was a little disappointing to find that every one of the temples follows this formula, but what are you gonna do? The boss for the Wind Temple, though, was probably my favorite boss of the bunch. It was so satisfying, diving straight through that thing's weak spot. I was very happy to have stumbled upon a rematch in the depths. It was just as intense the second time around. Oh, and Tulin's ability is probably the most useful one in the game. Good bird child thing. Next, I tackled the Lightning Temple. This started to feel more like a traditional Zelda dungeon with the focus on mirrors and manipulating light beams. I enjoyed myself in this dungeon, but I think it's the bottom of my list. Riju's ability is one of my favorites though. That lightning strike is great for crowd control. I then headed for the Fire Temple, and as far as the dungeons go, I feel like the Fire Temple was the one that allowed for the most creativity to get it done in any way I wanted to. I bomb jumped and climbed all over the place to get chests. I used my minecart shield to get across single rails that were broken, and there is no way I got the last lock how I was supposed to. It was actually the one on the first floor of the dungeon. I went down to the lava, I got out one of my own Zonai hydrants, made some impromptu platforms to get underneath the room where the switch is, and then just ascended up into it. This very well could have been the right way to do it, but I never felt this creative in any of the other dungeons. The boss fight against Goma was also pretty cool too. Love Yunobo's ability, and the way it was used in this arena was excellent. Then I finally went through the Water Temple, and of the 4 main quests to get to the temples, the Zora questline felt the most like a traditional 3D Zelda experience, using information to solve puzzles rather than an ability. And solving mysteries from clues NPCs give you was a different experience than the rest, which were typically combat related. There was still some of that in Zora's domain, but it felt more narrative driven here. Even still, the temple itself was pretty great with its zero gravity shenanigans. Sidon Sage ability, it was pretty meh. It was put to good use in the Water Temple, and it did come in handy against this ass in the final gauntlet of fights. This thing and its cannonball attack that kills me in one hit caused me to have to redo like 4 waves of enemies just for another attempt, and it happens so often. Then after that fight, you have to beat a bunch of Phantom Ganons too. I was getting a little frustrated with how much of a marathon this gauntlet is. But the final boss, this was the way to do it. Several phases of a one-on-one duel with Ganondorf was the perfect way to cap off the game. The reward for doing the 4 main story quests was much more practical enjoyable this time around. Instead of just getting to skip half the fight, the 4 sages show up in person to help you fight waves of enemies. This was a far better solution in my eyes. It's still a reward, but not one that neuters the fight itself. No, Ganondorf was certainly not neutered. He was tough, but rarely unfair. The only time I called foul was when he was on his last phase and will dodge your first attack. When he has his Gloom Sword out, it's impossible to know if he's going to do a vertical or a horizontal slice. So it's a 50-50 gamble on which of the dodges you need to perform. I got it wrong so many times and had to restart so many times, I ended up just beating him by sniping him in the head. I don't f with this no telegraph having shit in my house, Mr. Demon King. Try again. But yeah, I think that about covers my time with Tears of the Kingdom. I guess now I'll say how much I appreciate you guys voting for me to look at it. While I might not have been super excited to check it out initially, I think I can say I'm a bona fide fan of this new era of Zelda now. I still don't have any real interest in going back to play any of the original 3D Zeldas. I'd be more interested in playing something like A Link to the Past before that, honestly, but that's assuming I haven't had my fill of Tears of the Kingdom by then. For as much as I saw and conquered in this game, there is still so much that I haven't even touched. There are still sections of the map I haven't uncovered. There are still side and main quests I still need to do. I never found the Master Sword or the Hylian Shield. I never found a single great fairy. I didn't make as many crazy death machines as I would have liked. I didn't get to complete my Dark Link set. I still have so much left to see in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, but I can safely say that I'm hooked. Whatever the next Zelda game is, I'll pick it up on the chance that I could have another experience like this again. The merging of more traditional Zelda elements into the open world Zelda formula was as effective as it could have been for me. I loved the well-designed sections I was funneled into while also still loving every second of traversing Hyrule. Getting distracted has never been this much fun, making this game the definition of it's about the journey, not the destination. Even if it doesn't hurt when the destinations are constant bangers as well. And this is all running on a portable device from 2017. In the coming future, developers will spend millions of dollars and years of time trying to implement the systems that Nintendo has in this game. And again, on a handheld device. That's bananas to me. I did experience my fair share of sub-30 frame rate dips, but that's honestly a small price to pay for this technical achievement. And just so we can come back to it later on, when Ultra Hand-like systems start popping up in about 3 years, I predict devs will immediately put limitations on how many objects can be attached to one construct at a time. I don't think anyone will allow for the amount of limitless freedom we have in this game. That is my prediction for the next 3 years. I want to thank you all so much for watching all the way to the end on this one, and probably spoiling a few things for yourself just to hear me gush about one of my new favorite games. The next time we meet though, we will be blasting our way through Doom Eternal, so I hope you'll subscribe and enjoy that video when it comes out. I will be breaking down that entire combat system to every last succulent detail. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching, so thanks for stopping by and have a great day.